Hello, and welcome to the University of Utah Press's podcast. I'm Hannah New, and with me today is the delightful Jeff Metcalf.
Thank you.
Jeff Metcalf is a professor of English at the University of Utah and has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Distinguished Teaching Award, the National Council Teachers of English Outstanding Teacher Award, and the Writers at Work Lifetime Achievement Award. His fiction and essays have appeared in local and national magazines, and his most recent play, A Slight Discomfort, has been widely staged in both the United States and Europe. His first collection of essays, Requiem for the Living, was the winner of the 2012 Utah Division of Arts and Museums Original Writing Competition, and his latest collection, Backcast, Fly Fishing, and Other Such Matters, came out this month. So welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here, and it's a pleasure being with you.
When I first started these podcasts, you were the very first person I had in mind, but I knew Backcast was coming out, so I had to wait before we could.
Well, that was great thinking, and I'm thrilled to be here, really.
Great. So first I'm going to read this endorsement by James Barilla, the author of West with the Rise, Fly Fishing Across America, and he said this about your book. This collection of essays is ostensibly about fly fishing, but like the best writing in this genre, it resonates far more broadly. The narrator comes to the river while dealing with major questions about his health, and the wry humor and evocative writing are set in a contrapuntal fashion against reminders to live fully in the moment. So could you talk about how this book, Backcast, came to fruition and why it isn't just for fly fishers?
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's a great question, and that was high praise from James. He's an amazing writer and a great professor. I've never met him, but I'd like to. And I'm not convinced he read the book, because that's way too high of praise. I'm just saying, But anyway, I really think in many regards the natural world has saved my life. The most darkest moments of a journey I've been dealing with cancer. I go to the river, and there I find great comfort. I step into the water, and in 15 minutes, everything is left behind. And it's just deep balm for the soul. So I thought, I had written for a number of fly fishing magazines over the years, and thought, I really need to pay honor to the natural world, because it seems to be disappearing. And still the rivers are fantastic, and you never have a bad day of fishing, ever. Water's beautiful, trout live in it. Maybe a bad day of fishing, never, but a bad day of catching. Now that happens, but that's not what it's about. But I think it has a wider correspondence to lessons in life, or the great knots of life.
So your other book, Requiem for the Living, came out in 2012. And it was written at a really important time of your life.
Yeah.
And it came about, you wrote an essay every week for a year.
I will never do that again. Hannah, if I ever decide to do anything like that, please take me to the river and drown me. So the challenge was, I actually thought it was going to be a completely different book. I wanted to write about the journey through cancer and the sense of humor that one must have to deal with that. And it turned out to be, seriously, a celebration of life. So 52 essays in 52 weeks, and then culled them down to what we have in Requiem for the Living. And that was not the original title, but it made sense. You think of Requiem as something for, I think of the great masterpiece, Requiem. Music, piano, beautiful stuff by Mozart, Amadeus, I think. And Requiem seemed perfect, because why not make it a celebration of life, which it turned out to be. I didn't make any promises to myself other than I would write one essay a week, and I would write whatever came to my mind. So they're all over the place. The first one, I think, is the first one I ever wrote was from 1959. When I was a little kid, and then the next one was from 2002, and I thought, this will never make it. This makes no sense. And somebody saw something in it bigger than I saw myself.
It's a great collection of essays, and you actually say in Requiem for the Living, I have survived. I'm not talking about surviving my own cancer. I'm talking about surviving this memoir. Cancer is easy, But writing an essay every single week for a full year is insane. I truly knew better when I saw the collection, but I've been feeling the press of time against me lately, and it keeps me aware. Early morning has become a friend. Some of my most honest writing emerges in the unfolding light. So I want to go back to 2011, 2012, and can you describe the person you were before the book came out and the person you are today, and how is it different, or why not?
It's a great question. I began the collection, and the idea came to me because I'd had a really difficult diagnosis, and at that point, my doctor was looking at his feet when he talked to me, and I said, "Man, don't look at your feet. That makes me nervous," you know. And I was at a point where they really didn't have much for me, and I was diagnosed with a 20% chance of making it 2 years, and that was 15 years ago. So when it came back for the third time in different, locations, this was weighing heavy on me, and I thought, you know what, I need to get some stuff down. I've spent my life in writers' workshops, teaching, and helping other people to find a voice and find a way through stories that they want to write. And I thought, I need to be held to the same task. So I began, and cancer's not easy. That was kind of glib, but in a way, compared to 52 essays, I mean, you write 3 essays and get them published, they make you the department chair, and 52 was crazy, and I'd be downstairs early in the morning because I love to write in the morning, and I'd be yelling at myself, and my wife thought I had somebody at the house, and who were you yelling at? Me, I was yelling at myself. But anyway, so once I got going, though, I found a rhythm, and next thing I knew, 52 weeks was done, and I had 52 essays.
Yeah, it's a great collection.
Oh, thank you.
If I do say so myself, because we published that one too.
You can say it again. I don't have a problem with that. No, thank you very much, and it's had tremendous success.
So do you see your first book, Requiem for the Living, and this new book, Backcast, having a conversation or relating to one another?
Yes, I think so. That's a great question. I realized that in the first book, Requiem for the Living, there were stories about fly fishing in there. Mm-hmm. It was impossible to leave them out, beginning with a very early part of my life when my grandfather, Pops, took me fishing in Silver Lake Pond in New York, and there were no fish in it, but I didn't know. And, I started to think about this, and I really felt, as I mentioned earlier, that I needed to do something about that, to personally write about and thank a world that has been very responsible for my, I think, sense of humor, too, and also my surviving cancer. And there is a correspondence between the two books. They both are a celebration of life and moments. Absolutely. In the seam.
Yeah. I see them as having a conversation. I see them related quite a bit, and I didn't know if in your author's mind they were as well. So.
I don't think I thought about it at the time, but you look at it and you go, yeah, there's a connection. Or many people, that looked at the first sort of drafts of Backcast have said, man, this thing really dovetails in well with Requiem. Yeah. And now I take it like it was my idea. Yes, of course I was trying, I was trying to do that. I wasn't. I was writing, trying to be true and honest in my writing.
Absolutely. So, would you like to read a section from Backcast?
I'd love to. What would you like me to read?
I marked a couple, but I think El Gato in the Shadow is probably one of my favorites in this book.
I will be happy to read that for you, if I can find it here.
It's marked, right?
Oh, got it. Okay. The excitement, I can't stand it. El Gato in the Shadow. I've been here before. Several times I think I'm sure of it, and I look forward to being here a stone's throw from the ocean on a rugged coastline that does not invite the casual and careless guest. There are black flags along the beach warning swimmers of dangerous undertows and riptides, but these American tourists, bolstered by cheap 2-for-1 happy hour drinks, and the 4 o'clock booze team are capable of doing incredibly stupid things. The first day, A middle-aged man, well liquored up and encouraged by his group of friends, makes a beeline straight toward the Sea of Cortez. "Last one in buys the next round," he screams over his shoulder. A belly flop, the howl of his friends, and then a tumble of ass and limbs. His friends are silenced. His wife or girlfriend screams. His bathing suit is ripped off. We all see this man, and then he's gone. Somewhere under, somewhere in the deep, and he doesn't resurface. There's no lifeguard on this beach, and it says so in plain view in 3 languages. There's a large board that shows what happens to people in riptides, and it's very clear. I wonder what the man's last thought was. Did he have children? Did he, in his last breath, say he loved them? El Gato recognizes me when I see him after a long walk along the beach. He smiles and we shake hands. I ask him about his daughter and his family. "If I remember correctly, your daughter's 17 now." "Yes," he replies. It means something to him that I remember. El Gato drives a golf cart on the hotel property and is very proud of his work. He tells me that his daughter will graduate this spring and she wants to leave home to become an actress. El Gato's worried. It would mean sending her to live in Mexico City, and Mexico City, he tells me, is a dangerous place for young girls. He asks me what I think he should do. I tell him the only thing I really know about being a father is that he must help his daughter do what will make her happy. I suspect this was not what he wanted to hear. "Would you do such a thing?" "I have, Gato, and it's not easy. But it was a good thing." "I think so. You have come with your wife and your children." "My wife. My children have grown up and they are living their lives. They are happy and I'm happy for them." For a while we just stand side by side and absorb the sunset together. We both understand it perfectly. Finally, El Gato says, "The shadow is still alive." "You've seen him?" "Yes, and if you will stay here and wait until dark, you might see him go back to the cave. The tide is coming in now." The shadow is a man who lives on the beach and survives by the ocean. He's a phantom, a mythic figure, a warning to children who wander too far from the resort. The resorts would like to get rid of him, but they can't. It is his beach, too. "Have you ever talked to him?" I ask. "No," El Gato replies. "It is not safe." "Why?" "Because some people think he's La Serpentine." "Do you think that's truth?" El Gato thinks about this for a moment and then shrugs his shoulders. "I don't know. Maybe he's just a man who loves the ocean." "Yes, maybe that is possible." "El Gato," I say, measuring my words carefully, "I understand the shadow. I admire people like him. He is a noble man, perhaps." El Gato nods his head and then excuses himself. "Well, I must return to the registration desk. We have many guests coming in." "Of course," I reply. "It's good to see you again. In the next 7 days, I will look for the shadow when I can. I will climb up to his first cave. He will not be there. It's a comfortable space, and from the entrance, he has a panoramic view of the Sea of Cortez. From this vantage point, he can observe the great whales, the humpback, blue and gray as they migrate to their birthing waters further south. This is not a crazy man. One morning, I will walk the beach early, carrying with me a large bag of tortillas and ground coffee. I will leave it at the front of the second cave, the cooking cave. I will not see the shadow on this trip, and I cannot be certain he still lives in these caves. But in the end, it makes no difference to me at all. A part of the shadow lives in me. It resides in the deepest part of me. It is a part I understand clearly, and is a part I have most difficulty trying to explain. When I return to the casita Alana is just getting up. She's standing in the kitchenette and has poured herself a glass of mango juice. This is weird, but somebody took our coffee and tortillas. She thinks for a moment and says, "You think it might be one of the housekeepers? That they might have..." But I stop her before she can finish the sentence. "I took them to the Shadows Cave this morning." "Seriously?" "Yes." "Why would you do something like that?" "Because it was necessary, and we can buy some more." She regards me for the longest time and finally says in a resigned voice, "You know, sometimes I just don't get you at all." And I reply, "Yes, I do know that." And she shakes her head, pads over to the coffee pot, and pours us both a cup.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So when we set this up, I knew I couldn't ask you regular questions. Like, who are your influences? Do you believe in writer's block? Right? So I asked around, and this question is from my incredibly smart graduate assistant, Cleo. And she says, "There's a definitive theme of water and rivers in this work, as well as themes of mortality, death, and the fragility of the human body. In the process of pulling together these essays, did you think about the ties of intersections of water bodies, and human bodies themselves as water bodies, human bodies being about 60% water?" So can you talk about your...
I can, and that is a fabulous question.
It is, yes.
And you all need to give her a raise. You want those
tell her.
people working with you. But yeah, what I realized, and I did a very short piece for Video West that Doug Fabrizio directed called Ghosts Come Closer. And it was a complicated piece because he wanted to see if he could merge a story about cancer and the water together. And I said, "Doug, man, there's a guy doing a documentary on that. And I'm happy to do it." But I thought about the idea that all of us are born of water. We're all born of water, and what we do with our lives can be very interesting. And I'm not done. So the idea of coming from water certainly resonates deeply in my bones. And I think that's probably the best way to answer that question. I'm always cognizant of the fact that, you know, we're not far away from water if we think about it.
Yes, true. Another person I talked to about preparing for this was your old student, Hannah, and I'm going to say her last name wrong, Hannah Jabbar?
Oh, Jabbar. Yeah.
Jabbar. Hannah Jabbar.
Fabulous school teacher.
Yeah, she's great. And she has a horse. And she wanted to ask about how you view teaching and writing together. You obviously have been teaching writing for a really long time.
A very long time, yeah. A very long time. Older than you've probably been on the face of this earth. So the course, well, I'll tell you what, they're both creative processes. I mean, if you're going to be a good teacher, you're creating. You know, you can't teach as long as I have with not finding great humor in it and also finding ways to change in the middle of the stream. I mean, think about it. It's kind of like, and I don't want to, this is not too deep here, but it's kind of like watching a hatch and realizing that the fly you tie on might be too big or it might not be working. And you've got to make a quick adjustment right there. And you have to do the same thing in teaching. You have to be ready to turn at a moment's notice. And if you're the kind of person that can't do that, it's probably going to be a very short career. Hannah, on the other hand, completely gets that. And that's what I try to teach not only in my teaching methods courses to those young men and women who are crazy enough to want to be public school teachers, but I teach that in the writing too. You know, you've got to be able to trust yourself, and you've got to write like your hair's on fire, and you've got to teach like your hair's on fire, because students get it. They know who the good teachers are, and that's because they have that same sort of passion.
I find that very true. We're both very similar. Well, Requiem for the Living is one of my favorite books that we have published.
Oh, gosh.
That cast is getting up there, but Requiem for the Living.
Thank you. That's very kind.
And so I'm going to ask you to read a short section out of Requiem for the Living as well.
I'd be happy to.
And as much as I would love to have Magpie recorded, I just don't think I can handle it.
I don't think I could read that without crying. It's a piece that's surprise. I mean, that's the element of writing, is the element of surprise. It's also the same thing with teaching. You know, you have something one day that you don't think is going to work, and it explodes, and you go, that's the mystery of teaching. You know, that's the secret of teaching. Yeah. What would you like me to read?
Maybe Hung, if you're up for that. I'd like that one.
Okay, just the title alone, it's not what you think, and I am not. Hung. Hung. I'll admit that part of the incident might have been my fault, but in my own defense, I was a fourth grader in Mrs. de Harris's class at the international school in the Netherlands, and there was very little I could do right as far as she was concerned. My older sister, the genius, had been one of her students, and I was, by all measure, a terrific disappointment. But part of my job when we formed the pen pal correspondence with a sister school in the United Kingdom was to write the class letter. It was the only thing in the fourth grade I did well. When I wasn't weaving these fantastic tales of adventure and danger, I worked almost full-time at being class clown. Mrs. de Harris would have delegated, or would not have delegated, that responsibility to me of her own accord, but Principal Whitehead had insisted that I be the official scribe, and that was that. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, at Mrs. de Harris's disposal that could work against me, and for a fourth grade student, such elevated status was indeed a wonderful and joyous event. I would like to say I penned some of the finest prose the fourth grade have ever witnessed. Such classics as Tarzan and Dart Fight the Monster Gorilla and Danger at the Brussels World Fair were daring literature in the day, and I took my profession seriously. To not do so would have been churlish. So on the last day of school, Mrs. de Harris would bring treats to class, and just before we were dismissed for the summer, she would call each student to the front of the room and bestow upon them a prediction of the future. I couldn't wait, because my position of power and privilege at the official scribe had granted me such schoolyard respect. I had no idea what baptism Mrs. de Harris would offer, but it had to be good. For all her nastiness, I must admit that Mrs. de Harris was truly one of the first feminists I'd ever met. The predictions were done in alphabetical order. Margaret was going to be the first female member of Parliament, and Nigel would become a medieval scholar at Cambridge. Oh, this was better than anyone could have hoped for under any circumstance. I worried about my classmate Danny Keeley, who was, before my elevated status as a writer, my comedic equal. In truth, however, he was much better than I. His impersonation of Alfred Hitchcock doing Adolf Hitler was sheer genius, placing him in a league of his own. And when Mrs. de Harris predicted he would be the next Jerry Lewis, the class went wild. There was only one student before my prediction, and I was getting lightheaded. At the minimum, I would be compared to Franklin Dixon, author of the wildly popular Hardy Boys detective thrillers. But my secret desire, and I realized that this would extend beyond Mrs. de Harris's generosity and imagination, would be to be compared to Edgar Rice Burroughs. It would be the capstone of my writing career. And my name was called out, and I flew up to the front of the classroom, and the crowd was on my side, and I looked at Mrs. de Harris, and she smiled at me, and for the first time I could ever remember, she looked beautiful. And today, again, for the first time as far back as I could remember, she didn't look angry. "Jeff," she began, "you will be the first person from this class to be hung from the gallows." And clearly, I must have misunderstood. I looked out at the class. Their faces were frozen and stunned. It couldn't be. Not after my epic penning of the bird boy of the tundra. She must have made a serious mistake. Right now, she said, patting my arm and sticking a sucker in my hand. Back to your seat. We've others to do, don't we? And I sat at my desk fighting back tears. Bubby Tarquini patted me on the shoulder. And Danny Keeley tried to get me to laugh with his Alfred Hitchcock impersonation. None of it worked. I could only think about one thing. What would it feel like when the gallows dropped?
Thank you. That's one of my favorite pieces of the book.
You know, I have to say this, that I had this same teacher in the 3rd grade, and that's when I started my writing career. But the interesting thing was I never wanted to see her again, and she got married over the summer. So when I saw on the sheet of who I was going to have as a teacher, I thought, oh, thank goodness I don't have Miss X, you know. And it was the same teacher, and I knew I was in Dante's Inferno. But I think I learned as much from bad teachers in my career as I did from good teachers. You know, I never backed a student. I like to think I never backed a student into a corner and never felt that I made any student feel uncomfortable.
Well, thank you for meeting with me and doing this podcast.
That's it? I want to read some more stories.
Well, I kind of want Magpie on there, but I can't take it right now. But.
Well, I'll do a book on tape.
Yes.
How about that?
Yes.
And for the press.
Yes.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like that. So this has been Jeff Metcalf, and I'm Hannah New, and this has been the University of Utah Press's podcast.
Thank you so much.